Welcome to Solutions with Courtney Anderson. I am your host and guide, Courtney Anderson. Thank you so much for joining me. Today we have a show that is part of our Help Situation Spotlight series. And of course, our Help Situation Spotlight series is all about taking information, suggestions, questions, concerns, fears, worries, problems from community members. So people come to the website, people ask me questions when I give speeches, people seek out my advice, and we try to come up with at least a rudimentary analysis within a half-hour format show. The specific issue that a community member has shared that they'd like some feedback on is, my boss hates me. What do I do? How can I save my job? So this is a person who's saying, help! My situation is, my boss hates me. What do I do? How can I save my job? And this is something I've heard around the world in all different parts of our awesome planet. People sharing with me this fear and concern. So a couple of things at the outset. I'm always focused on how can we surpass our goals. And I'm always going to be focused on pragmatic, what works in the world is, passionate, and being a problem solver. So the question, my boss hates me, what do I do? How can I save my job? I interpret these types of questions to mean that the person either wants to, but more often than not, they need to save the job. In other words, they need the job. And most frequently, they need the job because they need the income. And so their concern is not so much whether or not people like them or don't like them or love them or hate them, but their concern is how that relates to them losing this employment opportunity. And that's really the crux of the issue. So let's start to look at this from a couple different angles and see what kind of solution suggestions we can come up for to help people in this situation or predicament. So if somebody's asking, oh my goodness, first they're saying, my boss hates me. My first response in that part of the equation is, how do you know that? How do you know they hate you? Now, sometimes I've asked that, and literally people say, oh, I'll show you. And they have like emails, memos, performance reviews, or evaluations where literally it'll say something like, I hate you, sign their boss. All right, well, that's a pretty strong signal, and I'm not necessarily going to debate that. That does happen, and it's not a good decision on the part of the boss because it opens them up to potential legal complications for making decisions at work based on their, feelings, emotionally, whether or not they like or don't like somebody or love them or hate them, instead of focusing on the job, which many countries have laws that require you to focus on the job. So not how you feel about them, but what they do and what they do in relation to the paperwork their specific job description and position description requires. So that's a problem one, that there's legal liability for somebody who's silly enough to put in writing that they hate somebody they manage. But I've seen it. I actually have, so I'm not being facetious at all. The bigger problem, though, is, we do a whole series on human resource professionals and focusing on that. We do a series on managers. So for human resources, we do our HR heroes. For Hangout, for our managers, we do our management magician series, and all these are just different positions of the different communities that I interact with the most frequently. So when I'm doing corporate education and corporate training programs, and I'm most commonly interacting with managers and executives, HR, human resources, and then the team members. And one of the things that I stress to managers all over the world and leaders, managers and leaders, that they are not supposed to focus on whether or not they're liked, but they're supposed to understand that their role is to be respected, and they're supposed to accept and understand that if you're a manager or a leader and you are doing what you're supposed to, which means managing resources, which is going to be people, time, funds, things of that nature, then you're going to have to say no to, because not everybody's going to get everything they want. It's just sort of the nature of the, unless it's a one-person organization. If the one person is founder, chief executive, manager and employee all at once, well then yeah, you will get everything you want pretty much, because there's nobody to tell you no. If you have more than one person, then you're going to start to run up against the reality that anytime you hold people accountable and you have to tell them no, then they don't like you. And that happens at work, and then I do tons of programs and examples where it happens outside of work, right? Where, a parent who's doing what they're supposed to, I'm supposed to manage, the resources and manage people, get stuff done, make sure the home is safe and clean and people are getting their homework done. The moment you tell somebody no, even though they love you, you're a great parent, you're supportive, you have unconditional love, you're healthy, they're still going to get mad at you because they don't like it when you tell them no. And that's just the nature of telling somebody no. That's the nature of management and leadership. The challenge, though, is why then would somebody who's an effective manager or boss ever let their team members know these irrelevant emotions? It's irrelevant whether you like them or hate them or think they're awesome and want to be your new best friend, or you think that you never would want to hang out with them and they have a horrible sense of humor. None of that has anything to do with whether or not they're going to do the work. And that's why you have all these laws in many countries saying it's not, what we're trying to do is open up markets so that people who work well in terms of their skill level, their self-discipline, their organization, and can produce the best, measurable business or organizational outcomes, we want them to work there. We don't want people just going around making decisions based on, I think that person's fun, or I'd love to, hang out with them on my weekend and go to the lake. There's so much, they're so funny. Okay, well, that's great in your personal life, but what does that have to do with their work ethic and their ability to be the best person who can produce the best outcomes for the organization or different stakeholders like shareholders, clients, things of that nature. So you're trying to move away from this sort of old systems that were prevalent around the world where people really used to just hire, and in many parts of the world it still happens. But in the U.S. and in a lot of countries, what you used to do is just make a decision. I'm going to hire you because I like you. I think you're fun, or you remind me of myself, or whatever. And then the problem is that person might have had a horrible, work product, but it didn't really matter because you just picked them because you liked them. And then people you didn't like, maybe you didn't like the way that they dressed, maybe you thought they were boring, maybe you thought that they had, they were too short, maybe you thought they were not an attractive, skin color, maybe you didn't like their, the religious identity or whatever. Then those people often couldn't get jobs at all, or couldn't get job opportunities because people just made decisions on these social issues, whether or not I like you or don't like you or hate you or love you. So we moved away from that because we're trying to get organizations to get the best outcomes, and the outcome is not dependent on whether or not one boss likes some other person who works there. It's irrelevant whether you like them. And again, when I do training in this area for managers, I do a lot in education, corporate education. I do a lot of examples, again, about the house. And I say, well, let's say there's a parent, and they're healthy, functioning, stable, great parent, and they have, 4 children. And the reality is that, one of the children reminds them the most of themselves. They just think that child is really, really awesome. And then there's another child that they really don't particularly deep inside understand. And they think that child, has weird choices in music, and that child dresses odd, and the child doesn't share any of their same interests in sports or anything. And that may be really how they feel deep down inside, but it is a disaster as a parent if the children understand that the parent, quote, likes or hates some children more than the other. Then you set up a lifelong of psychological problems, and it's destructive because the things that the parent feels they don't like about that child shouldn't impact the fact that it's their child, and the children should all be treated the same. So if everybody has a chore they have to do, then everyone should have a chore. You shouldn't make only the child that you don't like do the chores, because then that child knows they've been treated differently, right? They've been discriminated against. And over time, it really is emotionally incredibly destructive. So we don't want to do that outside of work. We don't want to do it inside of work because you're in the leadership position. So you should not know your boss hates you is the bottom line. If you do, you have a very, very poorly qualified or completely unqualified person who's in the role of boss. They are failing and have failed in their job, because their job is to manage just like they would manage their 4 children. Hey, come on, well, we all got our chores done. That's great. Now we can all go to the park. See, that's the good outcome. This sort of damage and ineffective decision making based on who you like the most results in, again, horribly fractured and unhealthy family situations. And at work, it results in the opposite of what you're hired to do as a boss or manager. Your job is to get stuff done, get it done right the first time, get it done the best, find the people who can do it well, and retain them and keep them here and keep them happy and keep them producing and creating and being better than, and have a competitive advantage over other organizations or firms in your sector. That's your job. But you can't manage if people are walking around thinking or knowing, worst case scenario, they like him, so they give him, the better chair, and they gave him the promotion, and they don't like her, and so, she knows that they don't like her because she didn't get even interviewed for the promotion, and she has a horrible chair. And what happens when that, just like a little child or a young teenager at home is destroyed emotionally when they realize, I'm being treated differently just because you inherently don't like attributes of me. That's unfair. The child gets that, so does the adult. And the reason why, in addition to legal problems, even if it's not explicitly illegal, wherever you are in the world, for managers to do this, make decisions based on who they like and don't like, it's incredibly ineffective in terms of outcome. Because just like I'm the kid, and I know I'm the only one that was told I had to do, chores, and everybody else is laying around, napping or playing video games, and I'm the only one doing this, then I resent that, and I'm angry, and I'm mad, and I've been treated badly. How I act out, some children will act out, aggressively and scream, and some children will just sit there quietly and suffer in silence, but it's destructive. You're not getting good outcomes. And at work, it's the same thing. So if you think your boss hates you, or your boss hates you, I want to be really clear. Your boss is not a functioning boss. They're a boss in name only. They don't have the ability to actually lead, because you should never know how they, quote unquote, really feel about you, because it's irrelevant. All that you should be able to do is get up, go to work, and if your job is to sell cars. I had a job once. I sold automobiles. I sold Acuras at a car dealership. Then that's my job. And whether or not the boss thought I was, boring or funny or stupid or ugly or whatever is irrelevant. I was trained how to sell the cars just like all the other salespeople. I was given opportunities to sell the cars, and if I sold the car, then I was going to get paid the agreed-on rate fairly with everybody else. That just let me do my job. So again, I just want to make this really clear, because this is one of those things that's sometimes in social relationships people will say, "Oh, it's not you, it's me," when they don't want to hang out with somebody, they don't want to be friends with them or date them or whatever. But in this situation, it really isn't you. Your boss has failed. They are not able to do their job, because you should not know if they, quote, hate you or love you or whatever. What you should sort of see is that you should feel that you're treated fairly. And then you're going to be much more effective at doing your best, and you're going to get much better measurable outcomes than if you get people who just start playing favorites and ruling by emotion and by social issues instead of the work, which was sort of what the point was. So I just want to keep reiterating this, because it's not about you, honestly. They have completely failed, and if I was consulting in their organization, I would tell their supervisors they need to be removed, not from the planet, but they don't need to be in a leadership position. They're unable to lead. So maybe they can have some other job they can move them to where they're not a boss of anybody, or maybe they need to leave the organization if there's nowhere else for them to go, but they can't sit in the leadership role, and they're unable to lead. So that is what I always give is the answer to the problem. But your immediate issue is you're not in that position. You don't have the ability to get rid of that boss because they're ineffective and unable to do their job and unqualified. You're asking, me. My boss hates me. What do I do? Not what can my executive do, what can HR do. I want to know what I can do. I want to save my job. All right. The framework for my best advice in terms of outcome, if your outcome is you want to keep your job, my best advice for that is going to be thinking strategically. So in other words, you're going to do the opposite of what your boss has done. Your boss is thinking emotionally, which is totally illegal in most instances, and also it's ineffective, which is even worse in some ways, for getting stuff done, right? And retaining people and having people be engaged with the organization, do their best and all that. So how you can save your job is you need to think strategically. It does not matter who likes you and who doesn't like you and who hates you and who loves you. What matters is you need to perform whatever that job task is absolutely to the best of your ability. That's going to be the first thing that's going to help you keep your job. Now, it's not going to guarantee your job, because if you have a work environment where the boss hates you and is horrible enough of a leader to let you know that, often they're not the only ones in that organization. I've been to organizations, or certainly as a lawyer when I would sue organizations for all these types of violations of the law, making decisions based on who they like and don't like. It goes all the way at the top of the chain of command. So at the very tippy top, people are making decisions based on who they like and don't like. When that happens, even if you're brilliant and you're the best performer, let's say you're a car salesperson, you sell the most cars for the best profit margin, you bring in the most amount of revenue, it won't save you if you're in an environment where the entire leadership of the environment is committed to their own personal feelings. And that's just the reality of this. As a lawyer, whenever people came to me and they, had, especially that it was in writing, like these, memos and performance reviews and emails where the boss is basically like, I hate you, and the person wants to keep their job because they like the income or they need it or whatever, what I would do is I would work through them. And we did some programs here recently about, I think I'm about to be fired. We did that in our Law Lovers Lounge series from the legal perspective. But the reality is, if you know you're in a corrosive environment where performance is irrelevant and it's all about personality and personal feelings, then you still I would strongly suggest you still adhere to my advice, which is to absolutely shine in your performance. Because here's what will happen. When somebody's in an environment that's not based on performance, they're just based on personality and feelings, then what's going to happen sooner rather than later is they will fire you, because they're just making decisions randomly based on, I like this person, or that person looks like me, or that person reminds me of me, or whatever. And you can't fix that. That's why it's illegal in the U.S. and many other countries to use that, your age, your gender, your color, your national origin, because what is that? That has nothing to do with the job. But if you're in an environment where from the top down, the leadership supports that, then the handwriting's on the wall. And if the manager is so poorly skilled that they're putting in writing, which again I have seen with my own eyes, managers do things like this, right? That they hate you, and then you understand usually that you don't have a lot of time, because if the whole level of chain of command that organization supports these types of decisions, then they're not going to rein in your poor performing boss and get rid of them from that leadership position like they should, which I just talked about why. The whole situation is corrupt. And so I still am arguing you want to perform your job to the best of your ability. Here's why. When somebody would come to me as a lawyer with this question, hey, help, my boss hates me, what can I do? I'm about to be fired. Okay, you need to understand how humans behave. So you need to disengage your own emotions from this, because if you sit around and your feelings are hurt, that they don't like you and they're mean to you, then you're not going to be able to think strategically and do what you need to try to put yourself in the best position to keep your job as long as you can, so you can either find a better job, or if there really is a situation where you're in the part of the world where there's some sort of legal problem, you need to hold on to that job until your lawyer can give you some really specific advice about, what's the best tactic. Should you take legal action first? Should you have your lawyer write a letter to your company that you're going to take legal action unless they let you resign with some sort of severance package? You need to not be emotional, because that's what they're doing. You need to think about what your outcome is. Your outcome is you want your job, as long as you can. Again, if it's corrupt from the top down, meaning nobody's a leader, everybody's making decisions based on feelings, and no one can fix it, because the very top of the organization doesn't care. And so even though that boss is unqualified, so is everybody else above them. So what you're doing is this. You're going to do your absolute best, and you're going to keep all the documentation showing you were salesperson of the month, you had the highest revenue brought in, you were the first team to complete your project, whatever it is that are the metrics that you can get documentation on, you need to have that. Because what is going to happen, if you have a legal opportunity if you're in a part of the world where this is illegal and those laws are enforced, so then this is what your lawyer needs. Your lawyer wants to be able to walk in there and say, hey, look, this person had the highest, revenue of the whole firm. Here are the sales and the revenue charts, and even the person, had the reward. And now your company is trying to say that you're firing them for performance. It can't be for performance, because their performance was measurably, the best. It must be some other illegal reason you're trying to fire them, because of their age or their gender, or something of that nature. If you're not in a part of the world, so that's why you need your performance to be awesome. If your performance is weak, then even though they actually are making decisions based on your personality and the way that they feel, weak performance gives them cover. It gives them an excuse to hide behind, and what they're going to tell a lawyer is, look, yeah, I don't know anything about all these, allegations about hating people, but you can see right here that this was this person had the lowest amount of sales in the whole department. If that's accurate, and I mean they're not, just lying and falsifying data, but that really is accurate, then you're in deep trouble, because your performance, although you weren't being judged fairly, the organization will use that as an excuse for why they're making their decision. And by giving them poor performance, you played right into what they would ideally have wanted. They wanted you out anyway because they told you they hated you. They might just hate you because they think you're boring, or you won't date them, or they don't like your what they think your religious affiliation is. Those things are not legal, but by giving poor performance, you give them something to make an excuse that's not a lie, that you really did have poor performance, and it makes your position very weak. Assuming you're not in a situation where this is a legal issue, just how can you keep your job, then you need to understand what makes people think that they hate or like something or love it. When it comes to humans generically, the idea is, why does your boss hate you? Your boss hates you because they want to and they're allowed to. I spent all this time talking about corrupt organizations from the top down because that's being allowed to. Any organization that wants to either make money or meet their organizational vision, if they're either a government agency or a nonprofit, then that's all they care about. They're focused on that. And that's why they don't mess around with all this silliness about liking and not liking and all this. But an organization where everybody's allowed to make decisions based on who they like and don't like, then nobody cares about what's best for the organization or the shareholders or any stakeholder. They just are all operating on emotion. And if you're in that situation and you want to stay, then you need to understand that you're not going to be able to go to human resources and have them do anything differently. Remember, if the top leadership of the organization engages in the same kind of illegal discrimination, in most parts of the world is illegal. Even if it's not illegal, it's ineffective, right? Because I'm playing favorites. So my kids are, they're not working as a unit. They're all sitting around feeling different feelings. There's no teamwork, and we're not getting things done efficiently. So a lot of times people in that situation think, well, I'll go to human resources. Well, you can, but if the top leadership all the way down to the bottom supports and permits people to do this, then what's human resources going to do? Human resources, even all of our HR heroes that I do a whole series on, the human resources executive is not going to go to the senior executive and then lose their job simply because factually you're accurate, that you are, that you shouldn't be treated this way. They're not going to go lose their job and then their kids can't eat and they can't pay their bills. It's not happening. They're not going to do it. So sometimes people come up with that idea, and I think it's a horrible plan. People also sometimes say, well, I'll go above that boss I have to their higher boss. Again, that will not work. The only way that'll work is if the higher level boss has some sort of legitimate reason why they have not a clue what their subordinate manager is doing. Maybe they've been, ill and out of the office, or they're located in some other part of the world and they haven't been able to be privy to what's happening. And you have a preponderance of evidence, or more likely than not, you believe that person, has an established behavior where they do care about performance. If you have that, which is a rare combination, then you might be able to get some kind of solution from that higher level executive. But more likely, if the person's in charge of your boss, they know what that boss is doing. They're the ones that put them there and kept them there. So you're not going to be able to go, kind of above your boss's head to this higher level person and have that person go fix it, because they're usually part of the problem, right? They're the ones that let your boss be in a position to be able to do this and let them stay there. So the reality is, if you don't have a part of the world where you potentially have some sort of legal option, even just getting a lawyer, to write some threatening letter so that you can resign, and they'll give you a chunk of money, and they'll also say that they're going to give you a good referral and reference. That's kind of the best outcome usually in these situations. You're not going to, depending on the facts, but usually that's kind of the best outcome. These aren't things where typically lawyers, for just sort of the average person's income job are like, oh, this is going to be a big trial and we're going to file a big lawsuit. It's not worth it financially usually. So the best outcome usually is the lawyer can write a kind of a demand letter, have proof that you're a super performer, and then you can walk away with your dignity, money, that'll give you a cushion to find something better, and know that these people at that job will never be able to say anything negative about you or do anything to impact your future other than just confirm that you work there, and that was a healthy, positive situation. The challenge is if you don't have that, and try to take away this idea of fantasy, you're going to go to HR, or you're going to go to some other manager or executive and they'll fix it. It almost never happens, because usually the reason that person has stayed in the management position without management skills is because the higher level senior executives allow that. So it's not like they don't know, right? Your best option, again, is to think strategically, not emotionally. Understand why people feel like they like or don't like or love or hate something. With people, it tends to be generically the idea that you feel like you like or love people who are more similar to you, and you feel like you don't like or hate people who are really different. So if you understand that, you're not going to be able to change the things that are different about you. Most instances, you're not going to magically, oh, look, my height's different, I'm a different foot taller now, and my gender's different, and my national origin's different. You're not going to be able to do that. And even if you could, you shouldn't. It's ridiculous. But you can psychologically, and this is where people get mad sometimes and frustrated with the advice and the programs I put forward. You have to think of it like a chess game. It's all about strategy. So if your opponent is being emotional, then they're also giving you a predictability, right? They're not making decisions based on data, numbers, performance. They're just making decisions based on, as sometimes in the U.S. they'll call it a good old boys network. So you'll get people who are very gender biased, typically men gender biased in favor of men. Remember, I feel like I like you when you remind me of me. You can manipulate that feeling to a larger degree than most people realize. I've had so many examples over the years when I was much younger and working in a lot of like fast food jobs or working minimum wage jobs. I basically would just sort of listen to whatever the manager or supervisor was talking about was important to them. And almost everybody talks a lot and they talk about themselves. Your job is to listen. So that boss or manager, so I had a boss or manager one time that talked about how much they loved being a cheerleader when they were younger. Great. Then that reminded me, then I'm going to go talk about cheerleading and how great it is. And it had happened that I had been a cheerleader briefly in, I think, middle school and even briefly in high school. I'm not the most talented acrobatic person, but I think I did a good job of wearing the outfit and using the pom-poms. So what I did is this. All you'd have to do is listen and figure out what they say is important to them. They're not going to literally say, like, this is the most important thing to me, cheerleading, or this is the most important thing to me, fishing. They're just going to keep talking about their lives, and they'll talk about the stuff they do, and by their own prioritization, they're talking about those things that they think are important or interesting. So if they mention some sport team, or they talk about how much they love, being in southern Greece, or whatever it is, then they've told you what's important to them. If that is something that's important to them, it's a positive thing that they talk about, all you have to do is reflect back to them that same thing. You don't have to necessarily, this is where people say, well, it's unethical, it's manipulation. Well, it's unethical, and I would argue illegal in most parts of the world, many parts of the world, to make decisions at work about non-work related criteria. So if somebody's going to do that, then they should at some level feel a consequence. They're going to have, decreased efficiency. They're going to have higher turnover. They're going to have an impact on their revenue and profit. They're going to have poor retention numbers. These are all good things for you because you want them to suffer the consequence of being poor organizational leaders. But in the short term, you're trying to extend your stay there. And the easiest way to make people feel positive towards you is just to reflect back their own reflection. It's almost like a child's tale, right? The love we have of our own reflection. Sometimes people, it's all we crave. Not we collectively, you and I, but most people. And anybody who is such a poor business person that they're engaging in all this personality non-performance area to begin with is already played their hand. They've showed you their cards. They've shown you what their next chess move is. You have to just think strategically. If that's what they want to do is sit around and have these good feelings, then give them the good feeling. Do you have to, really love fishing or cheerleading or that one sports team? Not necessarily. It's not going to hurt you, though, to find a way that you're comfortable with. It's not a fraud or a lie, but to think of something that's positive about it, or that remind you of something positive. Or sometimes, one time I was talking to somebody about this, and they loved some sort of, I can't remember, it was fishing or something, and I started to talk about the reality. It wasn't a fib that I had a relative who had passed away, and that she loved fishing. That was true. And I just talked about, I searched through my brain to find some kind of positive way to connect back to this thing that's important to that person. And by doing this, it sounds incredibly manipulative. It's you trying to think strategically to have some impact on someone who's behaving irrationally and emotionally. And you're just trying to take us down to the most simple level. The reason they think they like or don't like somebody is because they like what they think is like them. So just give them back whatever that stuff is that you can. And again, you can't necessarily close several decades in age difference, or some other big difference, but it's incredibly effective. And go read some psychology in terms of psychological experiences, experiments, and see the power of this, of perception. And it's something certainly in the criminal area, the white collar crime. This is what con artists do all the time. All con artists do. The reason they're so effective at it, right? Whether they're a Bernie Madoff that takes billions, or smaller level con artists, is what they do is that's why they listen to what the person is important to the person. They just reflect that back. They're liars, though. So it's not real that their relative was fishing. They just lied and made that up. But what they're doing is that person, their victim, then starts to feel really positive and trusting toward them, right? They have so much in common. You're not a liar, so don't make anything up that's not true. But that I'm giving you an example of how powerful this tool is. It's sort of the basic psychology of how people who are enmeshed in these emotional frameworks, how they think. So if you're trying to buy time, then just find an honest thing that you can say that's real, that reflects back positively, something they've mentioned, that there's some tangential way that you can honestly reflect that back positively. Because, trust me, it really does work like that. They love fishing, then you said something positive about fishing. They don't remember all the detail, right? Was it some relative you said, or somebody, or one time you did? They don't really care about that. But it's that in some way you're more similar to them than they initially thought, and that makes them feel they like you more, and that will buy you some time, unless you're totally transparent with it and they start to feel like you're being dishonest or manipulative, which they won't feel if you're just telling the truth, and you're just honestly saying. You're thinking really hard in your brain. Is there something one time that you felt positive about that, or heard somebody say something positive about it? All you're doing is connecting something they're already predisposed toward, quote, liking, and you're associating yourself with that positive thing that's in their mind. And then they're going to start thinking they like you. This is incredibly oversimplified. I'm aware of that, but that will buy you some time. And then you need to get moving toward finding you another place to work. This is not a long-term solution. Do not think you can wait this manager out. Maybe you can, and then they'll leave, and it'll be a great workplace to work, but most of the time that doesn't happen because the culture that allows somebody to get in those jobs and stay there usually is too corrupt. So thank you for joining me. You can always come to CourtneyAnderson.com for more information.